Am I the only person that considers this woman to be the most arrogant, obnoxious person to ever deliver information to the United States people? If you remember Trump's people, they attacked them. They ripped them apart. Even Huckabee's daughter, they destroyed everything about her. You, the Democrats. Let's listen to her attitude. Look at her facial expressions.
Where else can you go to get money for testing and treatment? Is there money in other parts of the government? I mean, if there's not going to be a standalone bill that gives you it, what are you going to do? You need additional supplemental assistance.
Is she the president of the United States? Because I think she has a lot more to say than Biden. Her and her girlfriends that are running this country are really screwing things up.
We'll have to stop a number of components of our program that are essential to the American people. There's no way you can get money from, you move money around that's already been appropriated. Well, again, I think that if we had that money to move around, we would be moving it.
That's all you want is money. You want control.
We need this additional funding in order to meet the needs of the American public. And I would also note that a lot of these programs are widely popular across the board, regardless of your political affiliation.
How do you make a good-looking woman look extremely ugly? Here's an example.
Free vaccines. Those are all programs that we're talking about. One more question on another subject. The administration has been criticized for putting sanctions on one dictator and then going hand in hand through other dictators like Venezuela. How do you explain that? Well, I think our engagement with Maduro, who we don't recognize as we know as the leader of Venezuela, but he was detaining American citizens, was to bring American citizens home. That was our first priority.
It was a deal you made. It's ridiculous. You're dealing with a communist, and the Russians are in Venezuela.
There are a range of topics that we discussed. Largely, the conversation was about our approach to the Western Hemisphere. Certainly, Venezuela, as you all know, is the largest producer of oil in the world. But as you're one of them in the world. Sorry, thank you. Ed gave me a funny look there. I appreciate that. One of them in the world. But part of
They're communists.
Our conversation was focused about a range of issues, including encouraging them, of course, to be engaging in steps toward peace. As you may have seen, Maduro has announced his intention to be a part of the talks with the opposition.
Are you joking?
But as you are assessing,
The women had to leave Venezuela and become prostitutes.
I would not focus a lot of them on conversations about the future of the United States importing oil.
You obnoxious person.
From Venezuela. But touch on the economy. The inflation numbers that we received today show consumers paying almost 8% more than a year ago, and this was before Russia's invasion.
$6 gasoline.
How much higher does the administration expect prices to climb? Well, as you know, a large driver of these inflationary numbers from the last these monthly numbers were from energy prices, and we have seen the increase happen as a result of Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
Excuse me?
Well, we're looking at Europe.
Did you not stop the pipeline from being built?
Well, there are still predictions and projections from the Federal Reserve and outside economists about inflation moderating towards the end of the year. Obviously, they make those assessments on a regular basis. But in terms of prices going up, we do anticipate the gas prices and energy prices will go up. That is something that the President has conveyed very clearly to the American public. We also believe it will be temporary and not long-lasting. And what our focus is on
This
now
is my life.
everything
Constant
we can
noise.
to mitigate and reduce those prices and ensure there isn't a longer-term impact. So I can't make new projections for you from here, other than to convey that
Body language to me is everything.
That,
The whole attitude, like, what are you, a valley girl?
Inflation in the United States because of the impact it's had on energy prices, and that is a significant contributor.
It's just me, I'm sure.
The inflationary numbers we're talking about today. You said this is temporary. You've noted before that inflation is going to.
Can we go to restaurants where she is and start harassing her like they did to Miss Huckabee?
Of the Federal Reserve, of outside economists, and we really rely on them for their projections. But there is also no question that inflation may be higher for the next few months than it would have been without President Putin and Russia's further invasion into Ukraine, particularly due to higher energy prices. And obviously they will watch
To have a weak president, this is when other countries take their actions, like Putin entering Ukraine, because he knew that our administration was more focused on being woke and being weak.
Continue to monitor, right? We've been monitoring it, we've asked them to monitor it, but obviously at this point in time, when Americans are paying higher prices at the pump, this is one of the areas where we need to watch closely. Go ahead. Sure.
She doesn't answer questions based on what Biden feels. She answers the questions on what she feels.
Well, I would really point you to the CDC to provide further detail, but I would
the masks.
When you get on an airplane, you travel to different places, right? You're not just static in one place, whether it's a green zone or a yellow zone or a red zone. So what they also announced is that TSA will be, that the CDC will work with government agencies to help inform a revised policy framework for when and under what circumstances masks should be required in the public transportation corridor, because it's unique, right? If we're in Washington, D.C. and we're in the green zone or a yellow zone, you can make a clear assessment. If you're moving from one zone to another and you're picking people up from one zone to another, it's a little bit different, and that requires some consultation, which is what they're going to endeavor to do between now and April 18th.
France said today that the window on an Iran deal is closing. Does the U.S. share that view? Is it the sense here that Iran is trying to run the clock?
Well, our view is that we are close. We have been close for some time now, and we also, for the last several weeks, as we've been talking about. We also all know from having been through these negotiations.
What about Israel and Iran?
The end of negotiations is always when.
Is Israel happy?
Parts of the conversation typically.
It's likely that Israel is going to solve the Putin problem.
Or echo that from here. We are continuing to have these diplomatic talks. It is in all of our interests to stay at the negotiating table, and that's what our plan is to do from here. Go ahead.
One of my colleagues said nothing that Russia has done so far in terms of this invasion has gone unanswered. When you were being asked about bio and chemical weapons, obviously none of what we have done to answer Russia has steered them from continuing this invasion.
So basically, what's happening here is JenPsaki answers all the questions like she's the president of the United States. This is the way it's been the whole time. I don't think that Biden is running our country, and that worries me. What if we have these people who are pro-socialism, pro-communism, really running our country? We've got oil prices increasing. The same people are worried about climate change, and they want to see renewables. It's to their benefit to see the oil prices go up. In the meantime, we're leaving Zelensky to be murdered by the Russians. He's showing his courage. He's showing American-type courage. And this administration just sits there and does nothing. There are no rules in war. Why do they keep referring to NATO when we don't want to cause a big problem and have Third World War? Well, we have it right now. We have China openly saying that they want to join in Russia, right? Did China just recently stop having its companies traded? Didn't that guy from Alibaba disappear for a while? How about the skater? Didn't she disappear? These are the things that communists do, right? We've seen it even in our own country, the way they attacked the other press secretaries from the last administration. How a woman said, go after the Republicans. How Democrats called people deplorable. That's communist-type action. Let's go back to the press conference.
So why not consider some alternate strategy to communicate to Russia?
Towards that would not be international security interests and not in the interest of NATO. What we have conveyed is Russia's capabilities, their capacities, and their pattern of using chemical and biological weapons.
So then you say that that's the message to the American people, whose responsibility that, of course, is before any other. What does he say to Vladimir Putin if those at the head of the Russian government are considering that? What does he say to them?
If they use chemical weapons,
we have been very clear, and our actions have been
they've already used them
that there will be significant
with a massive flamethrower.
Every escalatory step that is taken by President Putin and the Russian government.
Just very quickly as it relates to the bids, you guys have said you close the door on supplying.
What are you going to do? Not send them any sugar?
We heard from the Pentagon, your colleague there, John Kirby, said it was high risk. Mitt Romney today said there was a sentiment that we're fearful about what Putin might do and what he might consider an escalation. It's time for him to be fearful of what we might do. Why is it?
All right, Romney, I agree with you for
higher
once.
risk to wait
Wait to what?
We're not supplying, to not act in providing MiGs to the Ukrainian country. We said that's a high risk. Why is that a higher risk than not providing them? We're already witnessing civilian side as we speak.
Well, I would say what our assessment is based on is how to prevent a world war here, Peter, which is a
Too late.
significant weight that the intelligence community, the Defense Department, and the President of the United States weighs at every moment in time. And they weigh, and I would note that that there was also, I thought, a very interesting comment that was made that is important, I think, for people to understand how we look at this, which is that there's an escalation ladder, right? And there's a difference between an anti-tank weapon, a shoulder-fired missile, an aircraft, and a fighter jet that could cross a border and actually conduct operations on Russian soil. So how we assess things is
well, it's not Russian soil, it's Ukrainian soil, Miss JenPsaki. Perhaps
most impactful in protecting, defending, providing assistance to the Ukrainian people as they're...
Perhaps your people think that Ukraine already belongs to Russia. It doesn't belong to Russia. It's Ukrainian soil. If we have MiGs and it passes into Ukrainian soil, not Russian soil, that's what the goal is. Nobody's going into Russia yet. Pathetic.
They're fighting courageously and boldly. And that is where the bar is for us. Go ahead.
Thank you, Jen. We just heard you say again that you think inflation is going to be temporary. We've heard you say that it was going to be temporary since last spring. So how long do you guys think temporary is?
Well, again, Peter, I think what we do is we rely on the assessments of the Federal Reserve and of outside...
Oh, so you don't have your own brains? You can't figure out how long inflation will be? Gas prices going up, food prices going up, the fact that you stopped people from working and you were giving them free money, the fact that EBT cards had spent their money and then got another $1,000 on it, the fraud in your administration is unbelievable.
In the world, that is going to have an impact, and it is.
Until that point, inflation goes up today. The president's statement blames the Putin price hike. Are you guys just going to start blaming Putin for everything until the midterms?
Well, we've seen the price of gas go up at least 75 cents since President Putin lined up troops on the border of Ukraine.
And last month, the statement didn't mention the Putin price hike. It mentioned inflation because of the pandemic. Why is that?
Well, last 2 years, there was a global pandemic. Everyone who's global economists have all agreed that that has been the biggest contributor to date of inflation.
Because the government shut everything down.
Obviously, global events impact the economy, as well as global inflation.
I wonder how many people will die in Ukraine versus how many people died of COVID, even though you labeled so many COVID deaths.
The impact on the global oil markets are, of course, having an impact.
President Biden's hosted electric vehicle stakeholders here at the White House. Would he host oil and gas producers, people who are the most affected by the Putin price hike?
Well, the oil and gas, I have nothing to preview or predict for you in terms of him hosting oil company executives. I don't have anything planned on the schedule for that front, but I will tell you that the president has been clear that he believes they have the tools they need, 9,000 unused permits. They have the capacity they need to go get more oil here in the United States, and he encouraged them to do that. Go ahead. Yeah.
Electric vehicles. You guys are pushing electric vehicles today. This is the president who always talks about the power of our example.
Mm-hmm.
Does he own an electric vehicle?
Presidents of the United States don't do a lot of driving.
There's the videos where he's revving the engine of his Corvette and Wilmington he owns cars.
And he also has driven electric.
Body language, people. Look at her. Look at how she points her face at the reporter and just tries to intimidate him.
The vehicles as president, as to give a model. So,
express support for a war crimes investigation into Russia. Why at this point is that the United States comfortable just directly labeling the bombing of a maternity hospital as a war crime?
well, first let me say, the bombing of the maternity hospital is horrific, it's barbaric. I don't think anybody who saw that could not have been emotionally deeply impacted. There's a legal review process that the United States undergoes to make considerations of labeling something as a war crime capabilities. The Ukrainian Air Force has a legal point. Obviously, obviously, if Russia is intentionally targeting civilians, that would be a war crime.
There's no rules in war.
But we need to go through the legal assessment and review in order to make a formal conclusion.
President Biden recently, early in his term, White House said the president was to conduct diplomacy with the Saudis through the king rather than through MBS. Why has that policy changed?
That report is inaccurate, so let me start there. The president did speak with the Saudi king just a few weeks ago, several weeks ago. It's all running together at this point in time. There was
Wait, weren't the Democrats upset that they claimed that the Saudis killed a reporter, and they thought that Donald Trump was being ridiculous for still keeping negotiations open with the Saudis? Do you remember that? I think the guy was Oshinogi or something, and the guy was killed, and they were blaming the Saudis. Now all of a sudden, the president of the United States wants to be friendly with those Saudis, even though he can increase oil production here in the United States and not deal with a bunch of murderers. Oh, and I think they were accused of the World Trade Center tower attack as well.
appropriate counterparts but from global events from a range of countries, including Saudi Arabia. So if the crown prince had been at any of the global events that the president recently attended, I'm sure he would have engaged with him, but he was not. Go ahead.
President Senator Manchin said today that he supported the Republican plan with 4 out of 5 Fed nominees. I know that you're going to say that Republicans on the banking committee should just get back to work and not allow the entire slate to go forward, but the president also said during the City Union that these nominees were crucial to the fight against inflation, and we saw today, obviously, that's still a pressing concern. So I was wondering if you could walk me through why you wouldn't take what Senator Manchin called away and get 4 of your 5 nominees. Is it because Sarah Blumraskin herself is crucial to this fight in inflation? Is it that you're worried about slippery slope in the Senate? But why not take the 4 out of 5?
I know you gave a little bit of a preview of what I might say there, but one, we don't have any change in our approach or policy here. The committee should hold an up or down vote on all 5 nominees. It is important to note that it is not a lack of votes on the committee to move these nominees forward. It is a lack of willingness of Republicans to show up to the committee to actually vote, even against this slate of nominees. That is where we have a core issue here. So we also would agree with the statements from Republicans in the Senate, like Senator Grassley, who said that senators should not degrade their advice and consent responsibilities and should show up and do the jobs the American people pay them to do.
I'm not against Democrats. I'm the way they treated people
and vote or not vote
the last 4 years. Well, anybody who was a Republican is a deplorable. It's not right. If you don't think that these people are deplorable, I don't know what to tell you. We're in a crisis, a world crisis, and this person's being arrogant speaking to us.
Where we absolutely have the votes. Republicans are just not showing up to get quorum for that vote to move forward.
Because the one person that you have going on the as an appointee is practically a communist. Sorry about that, folks. A lot of people calling in.
So we will fairly continue to monitor all of the risks and the impact. But right now, we believe the United States economy is positioned well to deal with the challenges ahead. Given, since the president took office, we've seen historic recovery.
Folks, there is no recovery. 22 million people were pretty much put out of a job because of COVID. And the only people coming back to the workforce are a part of the people that were put out of work. If you remember, they closed down restaurants, they closed down stores. The government told us what to do, just the way Russia does it, right? So now they're backing off because they have these elections. I beg you, who's ever in office, change them, because they were all behind COVID. I'm not only against the Democrats. I'm against anybody who tries to control the American people. We deserve better.
Considering to take any more refugees now. I know some advocacy groups have talked about, for example, admitting Ukrainians who already have pending visa applications as refugees. Are there steps that the White House administration would do now to get more United States?
Well, there are steps which are not exactly related to refugees, but related to the Ukrainian population, including temporary protected status, which we announced and are granting for anyone who has been.
By the way, we have open borders now. I want to talk to you about Venezuela. Venezuela is loaded with Russians. We already know that. Venezuela is in South America. You have a lot of poverty, a lot of corruption in South America. An open border allows the movement of potential terrorists, communists coming into our country. I'm worried about it. And remember, they're trying to take away our gun rights. FYI, I do not own a gun yet.
Who are welcoming refugees from Ukraine, who are providing them the assistance they need in this moment of time, and that's where we feel our efforts are best focused.
On the refugees, President Duda today, when he was speaking to the Vice President, asked if the U.S. could speed up and simplify as soon as possible the procedures for Ukrainians who want to come to the United States because they have relatives here and they want to stay here until the war is over. So if that's something that the United States is considering, and how quickly do you think that the U.S. would do that?
I'm happy to check on that. I would say again, I don't know what the numbers are in that regard, but all of our assessments from communicating with the Ukrainians, with neighboring countries, continue to be that the best way that the United States can contribute to this refugee crisis is by providing humanitarian assistance, funding to a range of countries who are welcoming refugees. So that's where our focus has been.
I also wanted to ask you about comments that Representative Madison Cawthorn made about the Ukrainian government. He said in a video that Zelensky is a thug. He said the Ukrainian government is incredibly corrupt. He said some other things, but he also said that Zelensky is pushing misinformation on America. Would the White House like to comment?
I would not. Go ahead.
The administration has talked a lot about short-term, waiting out short-term effects of sanctions on Russia, and so Americans might now naturally be wondering when the medium term might start. Do you have any indication at all yet that Putin is being squeezed by these sanctions as you put it yesterday?
That any indication he is being squeezed?
Making a different decision. I mean, the messaging from the White House has been this is going to hurt, Russia's to blame. Just wait it out. What can we tell Americans sort of when, how long? I mean, that's a natural question a lot would have.
Well, because of our efforts, the ruble is worth a penny. It's the lowest ranked currency.
Actually, it's worth less than a penny.
The stock market has not even opened. And you've seen in days, and you have seen outcry from a number of President Putin's buddies and cronies in the form of the oligarchs who we have also been squeezing. Our calculation has been that these financial sanctions and that we have
our calculation or President Biden's calculation. I thought that the president was running the country with his staff, not with his press secretary.
But in terms of the impact on his financial sector, the response from people who are close to him, and frankly from
conspiracy theory, JenPsaki is running the country.
When it will change his calculus, I can't give a prediction of that.
Can you talk to us a little bit about the president's engagement with senators who have met with his Supreme Court nominee, Judge Jackson? There are reports that he made multiple calls to Senator Collins, for example. How is it going, and what is his level of engagement right now?
The president has been very closely engaged in this process, even while he is rallying the world to stand up against President Putin. He has made a range of calls over the course of time. I'm not going to confirm specifics of those from here. I would also note that Judge Jackson has been meeting with a range of
far left judge
on the Hill, as you all have seen every day.
Far left judge.
Who may not have had any record of voting for nominees of ours in the past, but she's committed to meeting with every member of the Judiciary Committee before her hearing, and she is quickly working through that. And she is also committed to meeting others beyond that period of time.
As we fight communism in Ukraine with President Zelensky, or we at least should be fighting communism there, our government is appointing far left people. Far left means, socialism, leaning towards communism. Even with the Federal Reserve, we had a person that studied in Moscow. Doesn't this put up a couple of red flags? Here's my red shirt. Shouldn't that tell you that, hey, the Reds are coming? Let's be realistic, folks. We've got a problem in Washington. And the problem is their attitude, their disgraceful attitude towards capitalism, towards fairness, towards our Constitution. This isn't a bunch of white people. I'm not white. I'm half Mexican and half Arabic. We got a real problem here. The people that are running Washington that you voted for and you're responsible for are putting us in grave danger. Just look at the attitude of this press secretary. It's terrible. It really is terrible.
It's obviously been dealing with their own mega crisis coming out of Venezuela for years now. As part of these, as you've all said, that migration will effectively make particles is undertaken to Colombia. Is the administration prepared to, say, help correct the effects of this dynamic now for the
Well, one may have been a model. Colombia has in many ways in trying to take steps not only to welcome refugees, but also to crack down in many ways on migration. That's part of the conversation that the president will have. We have provided a range of assistance in the past, but I don't believe that there's a new assistance package coming today, but that has been part of our engagement.
I think that alarm is appropriate. That siren. We should all be very cautious of what is happening and what is coming.
How would you characterize the White House's role today in supporting diplomatic resolutions to the crisis? If there's any role the U.S. playing? The U.S. is leading the global effort to rally opposition to the actions of President Putin, and we have been engaged with the Ukrainians on a daily basis. We've provided more security assistance, more humanitarian assistance than any country in the world, and there wouldn't be the unity of financial sanctions and actions without the leadership of the United States. So what we're doing is we're putting the Ukrainians in a position of increasing, hopefully, strength in their negotiations and discussions. Playing a concrete role in facilitating these diplomatic talks. We are supporting the efforts by a range of leaders, including Erdogan, including our Turkish allies, including
we had a problem with Erdogan.
Including the French and others who are engaging directly with President Putin over this.
And by the way, the Turkish people support Russia.
Inflation for money, sure. And we talked about a lot of work that Wireless is doing, but it's largely been a long-term strategy. Supply chain work, supporting manufacturing in the U.S., semiconductors. The Americans have woke up and done a rapid headlines about inflation this morning. Is there something you want to point to that's what the White House is doing to provide short-term relief, immediate relief to rising costs? I would say that a huge part of what we've done has had an impact already. One is obviously inflationary pressures have been caused by the pandemic, and getting the pandemic under control, which has been the president's top priority, has the biggest impact on that. We've seen hospitalizations go down. We've seen people return to the workplace. We've seen 99% of schools open across the country. Also, the steps that our supply chain task force.
The only reason why they were closed is because the government closed them.
Including increasing movement through ports by, I believe, about 60%. If you look at shelves at stores right now, 89% of them are stocked. That is a direct result of the actions of the supply chain task force and this president.
This president is actually what closed down the supply chain.
Pressures were caused by the pandemic and caused by the impact on the supply chain of that. That right now what we're looking at is our
they blame everybody.
Pressures, right? Which is the pressure of the energy sector that is a direct result of President Putin's invasion of Ukraine. And what we are doing
actually, when they closed off the pipeline and they stopped giving permits for drilling on federal land, that's actually what created this dilemma. It forced the drillers.
There are a range of steps that have already had an enormous impact.
I got to tell you this. It forced the drillers to not want to drill because the price of oil was driven down so low. Actually, it had a negative price about a year and a half 2 years ago. The pandemic and the closing down of everything stopped the usage of oil. That was a government action, and that created a situation where many of the drillers went bankrupt, had to restructure, and they got fear in their systems as far as being aggressive in drilling, because they knew that the government was going to keep driving the price down. Now the government has figured out, well, driving the price up is even better because we're going to have less usage because the consumers won't use it. And that was all done according to this administration.
In advance of that, what would happen? What would be done to make sure that they can still be supplied if this disruption happens or is underway?
Well, what we've been able to do to date is provide, even in the last 10 days since we announced this new package, about $240 to $250 million in security, in military assistance, defensive assistance that, as we noted earlier in the briefing, is what
we need is to beat Putin. We don't need just dollars. We have a president that's going to be killed. President Zelensky will be killed, and we're waiting for it. And that'll end the problem, right? Because we'll just lose Ukraine.
So we have effectively and efficiently
America will have blood on its hands.
A range of assistance to the Ukrainians, and we expect we'll be able to continue to do that.
There was a helpful on-back off-camera conversation yesterday about the Colombian president's visit and details of the Venezuela engagement. I wanted to clarify one or two things. One of the officials said that there were no talks between us and the regime. We traveled down there to secure the release of detained Americans and are returning negotiating deal. So they did not speak with Maduro government officials about getting the Americans released?
Well, we were working to free American citizens. As I said yesterday, detained in Venezuela, obviously that required speaking with those who had detained them. I don't have more details on who exactly was engaged in that from the Venezuelan side.
When was the last time U.S. officials had talked to anyone in the Maduro regime, whether it was holding those hostages before they went to Venezuela?
Luis will have further on this.
Before they were detained in Venezuela a couple of years ago? It has been ongoing.
Luis Orozco, with our news company, will actually have inside information from Venezuela. We'll get you the true story.
Prompted by what's going on in Ukraine, their visit? Or was it the result of unrelated months of work? Because there are some looking at this saying they're taking advantage of the Ukraine situation, potential vulnerability, the need for oil in the global supply, not just the U.S., but globally. This must have been why they went this week.
Well, the issue of detainees is our first priority, and we are also, as you know, had discussions about a range of issues, even as they were through different channels. But I would note that there have also been developments, including Maduro committing to engage with talks of the opposition that have happened over the last couple of days. But the release of the detainees was not for the exchange for sanctions relief or buying oil, and as I noted a little bit earlier in the briefing, this is not currently an active, while they are a very large producer of oil.
So appropriate. It was a deal.
Not currently at this moment an active conversation about importing.
First of all, I'd like to give JenPsaki credit for taking hard questions. But the fact of the matter is the exchange for prisoners was only one part of the deal. It was half of a deal we made with them. We probably gave Venezuela a lot of money, which is a communist regime, so that they could sell us some oil, which is probably why the price of oil went down. I think the shit is probably going to hit the fans regarding the deals made with Maduro and Venezuela and Iran. So be ready for it. I do think we're going to see $200 oil, which is going to have a drastic effect on our economy, on inflation, and on the stock market.
Any courtesy call from the U.S. regarding this engagement with Nicolás Maduro, given the circumstances and given that President Duque has been one of the most vocal critics in the region against Nicolás Maduro?
I'm happy to check. and see if there's any more.
President
details we can
Duquette is,
provide.
I believe, the president of Colombia,
I would note that
and it's a slap in the
our
face
objective
to
here and our
Colombia,
priority was bringing American
the
citizens
fact that
home.
America is working with
Typically, those
Venezuela.
conversations and the briefing out of them happens in a very, very small circle, and so I would just note that. But I will see if there's more detail we can provide.
If I may, is there any intention to declare Colombia as a principal extra NATO ally after the meeting with the president or even prior to?
Sure. Let's let the meeting happen. We will have a readout of the meeting after the meeting, and I'm sure
Body
there'll be some
language.
developments coming out of it. Go ahead.
Poking the head at the person, pushing them away.
Vote that took out the COVID funding. Well, obviously, one of the issues that rose with Democrats in the House was the offsets. Was the White House?
Does anyone want to pull their hair out like me?
Sort of half of that funding from the pre-existing funds, and is that something that would be workable in a standalone piece of legislation?
I'm just not going to negotiate on this from here. Our objective is
You're
to
not
ensure that there is
negotiating.
additional funding so
You're
that
a
we can
press
continue to
secretary.
meet the needs of the American people. As I noted earlier, those conversations are ongoing, when we will certainly be a part of them from here in our legislative team.
More on gas prices. I know you've spoken, I think, about the gas tax before, but there was a group of Democratic governors who wrote a letter to congressional leadership about a potential federal gas tax holiday, something that the president would engage Congress on.
Taxes are how they make their money.
Taken any options off the table, and including that one. I would just note that the gas tax, if I'm correct here, is about 18 cents. And obviously gas has gone up by a larger amount than that. So we will consider a range of options, but the biggest impact we believe we can have is working through a range of channels to increase supply in the global marketplace. And that is where a lot of our energies are focused on, but we have not taken options off the table. But
I want to follow up on something you said earlier about how the U.S. is supporting the diplomatic talks between Ukraine and Russia. But has there been conversations about America getting more involved? And is there a point where President Biden needs to bring both sides to the table?
Well, I would say that what our biggest focus is on is continuing to support the Ukrainians, the Ukrainian leaders, and we are doing that by being the largest provider of military security assistance and humanitarian assistance in the world. And our objective is to strengthen them, boost them as they are participating in these negotiations.
They're setting him up for a big
The
loss.
president has never closed the door to diplomacy. Certainly he has been leading the diplomatic effort largely around the world as we're rallying opposition to President.
Folks, we are setting them up for a slaughter. Yes, the drive of the Ukrainian people have kept the Russians at bay, but the negotiation is not between Ukraine and Russia. The negotiation is between the United States and the rest of the world. I believe that the United States is allowing this to happen. Who would let these people be slaughtered like this? It's a disgrace. You know, we had a situation in America with weapons of mass destruction. What is happening in Washington? And that was Republicans, by the way. And I always said that we'll have to pay for the killings that happened by us going into Iraq and Afghanistan. And look what happened. We had to leave suddenly, which was another disgrace, the way Biden handled that, President Biden. Now we have a situation with Ukraine. The world is literally watching us wait patiently until Zelensky is murdered or taken as a prisoner. Zelensky has shown us all what kind of courage that we could all have in a time of need. But friends, allies, there are none. Not here. These people do not care about Ukraine and President Zelensky because we have the firepower to shut this down. But we're letting and watching like a hangman in the center of the square get destroyed. They should be ashamed of themselves. JenPsaki, President Biden, all of Europe should be ashamed of themselves to let this happen just because you're not a member of NATO. It's ridiculous. You're a member of freedom. And you should be there fighting this war and letting it go to a bigger war because the bigger war has always been communism versus capitalism, versus freedom, versus democracy. And just because your name is a Democrat, you're from a Democratic Party, doesn't mean you stand for democracy. And just because you're Republican, don't think that you stand for democracy. A strong country should be there to protect Ukraine, should stop these murders. It's disgusting.
Putin's efforts, but we've also been engaging before and after nearly every one of these conversations with the Ukrainians.
Wow, I'm glad that's over, because that was 40 minutes of pure torture. Just watching this arrogant woman talk to reporters. The reporters were terrible with the prior administration, screaming, hollering out questions. There was no order. And, you know, the reporters themselves should be ashamed of themselves as well, because the way they acted in the prior administration at press conferences, when the president actually came up and answered questions, not a press secretary, is a perfect example of how the media is responsible for manipulating the direction of the world. And it's a shame, because we have this arrogant woman who's obnoxious, okay, and points and directs the questions her way. But prior to that, we had the Democratic Party and the journalists working together, all because Trump said a few stupid things. Ridiculous. Please join my channel.